Hello, everyone. This is Ed Breniger, and welcome to the Eddie Network podcast. My guest today is a fella I met over a decade ago living in Wyoming. His name is Shaun Andrikopoulos, and I welcome you to the podcast. And I look forward to kind of digging up all kinds of things that we should have been talking about over the previous 10 years, but somehow we didn't get a chance to. So tell us about tell us about your experience of living in Jackson, because I don't actually know much about that. So I'm curious about living in Jackson Hole and being a part of that world.
Absolutely. We've lived in Jackson almost 26 years. We moved here from the Bay Area. I had grown up on a ranch in Wyoming, and um, we decided we wanted to raise our kids in a place that wasn't the Bay Area. Nothing against the Bay Area, but it wasn't really where we wanted to raise our kids. So we had two young kids at the time, and chose to move to Jackson so we could be close to our family's ranch and raise our kids in a different environment. I'd done well on Wall Street, and so we had the means to be able to do that. We were very fortunate. But I also, pursued a pretty varied entrepreneurial career since landing here 25 years ago. So that's how we ended up in Jackson, and it's been a fun ride. It's been interesting.
Jackson is a haven for entrepreneurs, isn't it? And
Well, yeah, and it's interesting because you've got entrepreneurs who start out here as entrepreneurs. You have entrepreneurs who come here from somewhere else to be entrepreneurs, and then you have entrepreneurs who um, have already succeeded in whatever field they've chosen somewhere else, and they've got money, so they move here and not necessarily retire. Some people run businesses out of here remotely. But yeah, so there are a lot of entrepreneurs here, and there are a lot of Hollywood folks here, a lot of private equity folks here, and then you have all of the local folks who've been here, running the whole service industry. So yeah, that's kind of but there are it's an entrepreneurial environment, I would say.
I found it, having moved there from Western North Carolina, that it was far more intentional and rich an entrepreneurial climate because it wasn't just something that people did. It was something that people thought about and they talked about and they explored as something um, to grow. And that, I mean, that more than obviously the mountains and Yellowstone and all those places were, that's the real reason I moved there. But that culture of entrepreneurship really caught hold of me. And it was the thing which, as much as anything, I missed when I left there in 2020, because I haven't been around that intensity of entrepreneur belief and kind of philosophy ever since.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. It's funny because I don't think about it that way, necessarily. I agree that there is an entrepreneurial vibe here, and that, a lot of the people who live here are, like I said a few minutes ago, entrepreneurial. Um, I have found, so I've started a number of businesses and ran a number of businesses as Jackson being my home base. Jackson itself is not a business friendly environment, in my opinion. It's very expensive to live here, which makes it hard to hire employees. It makes even senior executives, hiring a CFO, CEO, to run a business out of Jackson is not easy because your money doesn't go very far. Um, the other impediments to running a business out of Jackson, of course, are real estate. Where do once you start growing a business and scaling a business, you need a place for people to be and travel. There unless you're in the tourism or real estate business in Jackson, there really isn't an economy here that that you can address. So it requires a lot of travel and getting on planes in the middle of winter and hitting a connecting flight in some place like Denver. So
Yeah.
but nonetheless, it still attracts that breed of entrepreneur people. I think are attracted to the adventure here. There's a personality type that risk taker personality type that tends to gravitate to places like this.
Someone years ago asked me, well, what kind of people live in Jackson? I said, they're people who ski and people who are preparing to ski. And that kind of it captures the whole ethos. And it's that kind of adventure of, and when they're preparing to ski, they're also fishing and they're riding their mountain bike and they're hiking and you know, riding their float boat down the snake. I mean, but there are all these activities, recreational activities that they do, and that's I think attracts a lot of people there. And it is an interesting way, but I agree with you. Is that it's not a business friendly environment, and I never imagined that I would create a business there, and it never developed. So leaving there was probably the right thing in that regard. But I still miss it. It's such a lovely place and great people.
Absolutely. No, we wouldn't trade it at this point. Even though there have been a number of bumps in the road over the last 25 years where we've thought about, gosh, maybe we ought to go somewhere else and where it's a little easier to do business. But we've stuck it out here. This is where our friends are. It's where we raised our kids. It's where my wife's career is, and we're here for the long haul.
I understand that. So when you said you started several entrepreneurial business, what kind of businesses were these?
Well, it's interesting. When I was in the Bay Area, um, I was in technology investment banking and media investment banking, and this was in the early '90s. I was very close to a lot of the the really important, innovative Silicon Valley companies as a research analyst. For one of the best tech investment banks in the business. And is what I saw was a convergence happening between communications, media, commerce, and technology, and that convergence, which ultimately became the web. I could see coming together, and I've always been very good at connecting the dots. So seeing trends which appear to be disparate trends, but then being able to connect those dots and say, okay, I think this is going to become a collective trend, and it's going to be big. Every time that happens, every time we have a convergence like that, it leads to a pretty big economic shift. So I decided to go to our management. I was a junior guy at the time. I was probably 2 years out of business school, and I said, look, I think this is going to be a big trend. Our bank is well positioned to take advantage of it, and I'd like to start a group that focuses on this. And they said, well, that's great, but there are no, public companies in the space. And I said, well, there are some that are enablers, the Sun Microsystems, Cisco's. We had just taken American Online public. It was related, and I said, we have a very good franchise in these areas, so I think it's going to be big. And they said, well, if you want to risk your career on it, go for it. We'll let you do that, but we're not going to give you any capital to for trading. Because usually the way it works in an investment bank is, that there has to be capital to make markets, but they made it very clear that you go for it, but you're on your own. So I did, and um, the very first thing I did was I had seen one of my clients called. It was a hedge fund in New York, and they said, one of our employees just left and went to Seattle, and he's starting an online commerce business, and you should go meet him. And so I hung up the phone and I called one of the bankers and I said, hey, we ought to go up to Seattle and meet this guy. And so we did, and we bought a plane ticket. We flew up there, and it was, meeting Jeff Bezos when there were six employees in the company.
Wow.
And through that process, that's how I view entrepreneurialism, is connecting those dots, seeing the opportunity, and really looking at no opportunity or no business, um, and no individual is too small to really take an interest in,
Yeah.
and um, and get to know, because those are the people that are really, ultimately going to form the future of the world around us. So that's where my entrepreneurial, uh, I guess, abilities really began to surface, and where I really was willing to go against the grain. I was willing to take risk with my career, and I was willing to lead others to see what I saw, and to get involved. And ultimately, we ended up doing the Amazon IPO. We did the eBay IPO, same story. Meeting those people very early on, and taking an interest, helping them, being an advisor, um, but without any expectations of what might come up back end. So, yeah.
And and that's really the way it happens, isn't it? That someone has an idea and they begin work on it, and someone through somebody's introduction shows up and says, "We're interested in what you're doing. Tell us more." And we're going to go find some money for you. And all of a sudden you have a $1 trillion business.
Right, right.
Well,
And
overnight,
well,
not
not all,
overnight,
not all,
not all
you
of
know.
them, but I mean, you look at Amazon. My son works for Amazon, and
Oh, that's great.
yeah, it's very interesting. It's I get the inside scoop on the distribution side of Amazon, and it's a it's a work of genius, but it's also a work of chaos at the same time.
Right. Manage chaos.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's where, I think a lot of people view entrepreneurialism as just going out and, living by the sword, starting, I'm going to go start a business, write a business plan, put a PowerPoint together. I'm going to go raise, $500,000 in seed capital, you know, build a tech stack, blah, blah, blah. That's what so many people view entrepreneurialism as, and I don't see it that way at all. I think those are the mechanics of it, but you can be an entrepreneur in a big corporation as much as you can be out on your own.
Well, the trick, I think that, I mean, this is the way I view it. The trick is in understanding if you're doing a startup, you're doing a startup, you have
Right.
to be prepared to run out of space in your own head where you must begin to scale it, and you can't scale it. If you've never scaled something, it's very difficult to scale it. If you started something, yeah, starting something is one thing. Scaling it is a whole different entity, it's a whole different animal. And I think that's what I find interesting, that point of transition from the startup to the scaling of a business, and how that happens. Uh, and I don't get to see that. I don't, I'm not in that world, so I don't get to see it from the inside very often. Um, but I understand that thing, because there's a scaling aspect to this podcast that's taking place, and it's the scaling is through the establishment of networks. I've just
Mhm.
finished writing about this, and so yesterday or 2 days ago was the 350th episode, and I'll by the end of the year I will have probably 300 people, different people who have been on the podcast.
That's
And
great.
and and so the question is, what does this mean? And from an entrepreneurial perspective, I see this not as a collection of one-off conversations. I see this as the building of a network of trust that becomes a network of networks. So all these 300 people or so become people who are connected to me as a network, and I can talk to them and say, who do you know that you think I should know? Because I have this question, or I'm looking for this kind of person to be on the podcast. Who do you know? And then they simply send an email out to the two of us, and the next thing I know, I'm interviewing them. And that kind of network effects, I think, is largely unexplored because I think people don't see their relationships in that way. But I think when you're an entrepreneur, you begin to see that your relationships to people really matter at a level that you wouldn't imagine until after you got deep into the weeds and you said, I need help. And who do I go to find that help?
Right. Yeah, I think that's a pretty that's a good observation, Ed. I think, networks are valuable. Um, in that there are individuals you can tap into in those networks for very specific um, questions, needs, advice, what have you. But then the network in aggregate is very valuable if you can figure out how to leverage that uh, and being able to go out and in my case, my network is you know uh, I've got somewhere around 5,000 LinkedIn contacts. And I'd say I'm pretty selective about who I link up with on LinkedIn. I don't just accept every invitation. Um, and I would say that, over half of those contacts are people that um, they may or may not respond to a message. And then there's a quarter of those contacts that would respond to a message, but really wouldn't follow up necessarily with, a request or, a meeting or a call or whatever. And then there are probably a quarter of those contacts that you could really rely on. So those are people that, I feel if I had a question or a need or wanted another contact in a specific area and I knew they could get me there, those are people that would actually pick up the phone and help me out. And I think that, and then, within that, group of contacts, I've been a generalist since leaving the Bay Area. I've done some, software and technology stuff, but I've also done things in the energy business. I've done a lot of real estate. I've done medical imaging. That's one of the companies that I have. And, so these industries that are completely unrelated, sometimes they tie back together, sometimes they don't. But those networks are kind of disparate, versus someone who's been in a single industry, say their whole career. That's definitely not mine. So,
Yeah, yeah, I
yeah.
yeah, I've never been in one place very long, and that has been beneficial to me because my probably like you, my the breadth of my relationships or network of relationships is pretty broad, and you know, and uh, a lot, for me, the trick is, well, what does it look like to build trust between us?
Hmm.
And that's a very difficult question, I think, in our time because um, it's just not part of the landscape.
Yeah, I think that's right. Well, I don't know. I mean, it's hard. I have a hard time getting beyond the ideal that I was raised with, which is, you should really trust everyone until they betray your trust, or until you learn something about them that makes them not trustworthy.
Right.
Um, and so, I've erred on that side, or that mode of thinking most of my career. And um, in general, it's served me really well, because it's opened my aperture to folks that I may not have otherwise. trusted, and I may not have otherwise wanted to work with. And so, but the flip side of that is you really have to have your antenna up, and you really have to be, okay, well, assessing what people's values are, assessing what their mode of operation is, and um, how they're making decisions, how they're working with other people, dealing with other people, and can they be trusted? Um, and then the network component of that is, like I kind of broke it down, the 50, 25, 25. It's that last 25%, of the network that I think can be, um, I trust completely, not completely, but you know those people well enough to where you can trust them to help you out. You can trust them to say the right thing, um, about you. You can trust them to say the right thing about other people, and have, good judgment. So, um, anyway, that's the way I look at trust.
I look at it very similarly, and I come at it very much like you did it as a younger person. Of okay, I'm going to trust you until you prove yourself untrustworthy. And
Hmm.
the assumption of trust, I think, is pretty largely it kind of been a given for a very long time, and I don't know if it is easy to manifest that today because of the contentiousness of the society we live in. But I'm willing to work with someone who will treat me with respect, and I'll trust them if they
Right.
treat me with respect. But if they don't, then I'm gone. I mean, and I've had a number of people over the years that's what's happened, and because um, I wasn't treated with respect, and I was taken advantage of, and oh yeah, we want to do this with you. And, I had a guy, I guess probably 20 years ago, invited me into a project with him, and we finished our putting the proposal together for this company, at 10 o'clock in the morning. He says, "Okay, I'm going to go back to my office, and I'll type this up, and I'll send you a copy for you to sign at 1 o'clock." Well, at 1 o'clock, he sends me an email saying, "No, I've decided I'm not going to use you."
Uh-huh.
And if I had been more savvy at the time, I said, "Okay, I'm going to send you a bill for the work that you got from me." So, but I
Yeah, I
didn't.
think, yeah, I get it. I mean, but that guy, he betrayed your trust, and at least within the, what was important to you. And I think you know, we are all making those judgments every day. Um, about people and about relationships and about interactions. So, I could go to a restaurant and have bad service from a server, and maybe it's a restaurant I really like. But that server, by giving me bad service, has betrayed my trust in that restaurant, and has diminished the experience. And so, that changes my relationship, not just with that server who I don't necessarily know, but it changes my relationship with that restaurant and that business. And so, and there's an element of trust in there, but I think it's bigger than just trust. That's my view. Trust, of course, is a two-way street. you
Yeah,
you have to, I have a hard time trusting people who don't trust me. And I've been in that situation, quite a few times, and for whatever reason, and those relationships trust becomes, at that point, instead of being an opener, it really becomes a barrier. And when you have barriers in relationships, you don't have authenticity, and you don't really know what you're getting from that relationship. So, yeah, that's, but it's a component of the relationship. I would say it's not the whole relationship.
yeah, and oftentimes, and this is what I've discovered, oftentimes the bad treatment of you, it has nothing to do with you. It's something else that's prompted it, and that's why it's surprising. And there's something else going on. And but I've become uh, pretty free to actually address bad behavior and become. I mean, you know, I mean, 40 years ago, I was a nice guy, and I would never utter a cross word. But now and I'm not so much I'm going to blast someone, but I'm going to say I want you to understand the effect of your actions and your statements to me, and this is troubling. And it's not so troubling to me because I can walk away from this, and but it's going to be troubling to you because if you don't change your mindset about yourself, meaning that you can go ahead and just kind of play people off one another willy-nilly. If you don't figure out that that's the wrong way to do it, you're going to find some heartache coming to you in the future. You better be ready for it because the people that you want to be a part of this don't want to be a part of someone who's going to take advantage of them.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right. And I've found that in myself too, Ed. Um, I think as you get older, at least for me, I become, every day I become less and less self-conscious about, doing the right thing. And what you're talking about is doing the right thing. And that is you're actually um, you're not scorning or ridiculing that individual. You're showing them a path that might lead them in a better direction. And I think that's
Well, ultimately,
that's making the world a better place.
we are not taking responsibility for that person. We're taking responsibility for ourselves, and we're behaving according to a set of values and principles and desired behaviors that allow us to maintain our own self self-awareness and self-preservation, our own self-respect. And I find that that's really difficult for a lot of people to do that because they're kind of dependent on other people's approval of them in order for them to feel okay about themselves. And and I think part of this is that having spent a lot of time in the ministry, I I saw that
Mhm.
in relationships. I mean, because I ended up dealing with a lot of relational issues in churches, but also in university, a college where I worked, and in the consulting of it. I mean, the relational side of these things were really significant and almost the inhibiting factor to the ability of a company or a group or a church to kind of figure out why are we stuck in this pattern of behavior which is constantly bringing us into conflict and bringing us at loggerheads where we want to fight one another. Why is it that we keep coming to this point in time? And some of that is, well, you're going to have to figure out what it is within you that constantly refuses to bend to other people's preferences or um, offerings to you.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that, that statement you just made, there's a lot in there. We could probably spend a couple hours just talking
Oh, yeah.
about that topic alone. But I find too often that people who maybe are looking for approval, and I've had many employees, executives who've worked for me on this sort of thing. And you can tell when they're looking for approval, but is what they're doing is they're giving up agency for their own path, their own behavior, their own decision making. And um, so, that's why I think, when you talk, and I know your podcast is a lot about leadership. When you talk about leadership, you have to put yourself in the other, in the other person's shoes. and understand what's motivating them, why, what do they need, what are they lacking, um, emotionally, spiritually, and how can you help them find that themselves so that they're not you can't give it to somebody. I think, people have to find it, but you can open those doors, and open those doors through, through reward, through, positive feedback, negative feedback sometimes, but helping people find that within themselves, I think, is the core to leadership. I mean, in leadership, there's really nothing, particularly in business leadership, there's nothing more rewarding than giving somebody a promotion, because that is something that is a reflection on, how you've helped that individual grow and find agency, for for how they conduct themselves, how they lead, um, how they find their path. And so, for me, it was, when I was leading large groups of people, or, large organizations, it was always about, hey, what can we do to get you to the next level? And that's more rewarding, than any amount of money, or personal success for me.
I totally agree with you. And it's something which I've been thinking about a lot over the last few years that that we've we're in a transition phase on everything that's going on. So let's just grant that. But one of those transitions is how we conceive of leadership. And when I began my interest in leadership 40 years ago, the leader was the person who was had the role of leader, had the title of leader, who was the top of the
Mhm.
hierarchy of the company. And I mean, I remember reading Peter Drucker, and Peter Drucker said, all leaders have followers. That was the way we thought of leadership. And I disagreed with that almost from the very beginning because I saw that leadership was very deeply connected to how you managed people, but not managed to how you related to people in an organization. And what I've come to conclude is that one of the chief roles of a CEO is to facilitate the leadership development of all the people in the company. And that's, I think, which is a way of talking about what you said, which was how do you advance someone? How do you promote them? How do you put them in a position where they can go to the next step? Well, I think that's a facilitation process that should be brought into the structure of an organization. And I saw that in an organization I worked with 20 years ago, where I came in as the consultant to help them write a new value statement and discovered that the previous executive team who had been there for 20 years had basically put a put a clamp on everything so that they were the only ones that made decisions. And the new C and they were let go because they made some very egregious moral uh, errors in management of the money of the company, and so they left, and so the new CEO comes in, and I get hired to write this value statement. And I've told this story many times, but it's a great illustration of what is possible. So I had my first meeting with the team. There's 9 people, five executives, and the 4 union officers. And I say, well, how far back in time do you have to go to when this was a happy company? And the union president says 20 years. I said, what was it like back
Mhm.
then? We were a family. We all cared for each other. We knew each other. We knew who our kids were. We knew what ball teams our kids played on. We knew all of that. And this team that came in uh, really destroyed all that. And I said, well, I don't know if you destroyed it because it's still important to you. I
Mhm.
think we could still make this happen. I don't know if we'll be a family, but we can recover some of what you lost because it still is there. And so we came up with this. They came up with their value statement, and The the new CEO chose the same one out of five that they had chosen. And so there was this coming together. It was a visceral, emotionally visceral moment that and that then they took that value statement and another team came in and they created a training program for middle managers to train all the lower echelons in leadership. And within 2 years, the company had risen as a medium-sized company, had risen to the top of their industry and had been recognized by Forbes magazine as one of the 100 most trustworthy companies in the nation. And I think it was because they chose to develop their people from the ground up, from the lowest echelon upward, and give them the skills they needed to be their very best and to be supported and to be affirmed and appreciated. And I think that was all that was needed for the company to become its very best form. And within a short period of time, they were absorbed into a larger company, which is what the board wanted. We want to
Hmm.
we want to, we want to maximize the opportunity to make money for the company. So, but it's that sense of we're going to go develop people. And so my question for you, since you've had this experience in the tech world, so how do you see that sort of philosophy or that sort of idea or mandate operating today in an AI world? You have any thoughts about that?
I haven't really thought about it in that context. I've thought about AI a lot, but not in that particular context. So this will be on the fly. Um, I well, first of all, people are not going away in management. Yeah, yeah, there we are going to get some massive efficiencies that come out of AI and using AI. But we're still going to need human beings to manage and develop other human beings. I personally believe that there's no substitute for authentic human relationships. And I think that leaders who believe that AI can somehow or another serve as a surrogate for that are going to be find themselves falling behind because where's your competitive advantage at that point when everybody has access to the same LLM or the same you know
Yeah,
wrapper
yeah,
application or whatever.
yeah.
And so let's just take that as sort of a premise. And I think that, the it's for people who take leadership seriously and who become students of leadership and um in some cases are natural leaders, they will never give up that human to human component of leadership and of growing. And in order to grow other people, you have to be able to grow yourself too. And that's a hard lesson I learned a few years back, where I figured out that I wasn't growing myself, and I wasn't. My internal leadership was in stasis and wasn't moving forward. And that's when I stopped being able to really be a good mentor, when I stopped being able to lead with love and authenticity that I'd always led with before. And so that's an example of where AI can't fill those shoes. And I think that it, it- you know emotional intelligence, reading the room, um, making hard decisions. Not, AI can be a very good yes man because it's trained on what it thinks you want, not what you need.
Wants you to be happy.
That's right. And so it sells more. So,
Let me
I'm
ask
not
you a question.
I'm not too worried about AI replacing, organizational leadership or individual leadership.
You just said something a second ago that um, I found was really interesting. And you talked about recognizing that you had to change, and in terms of how you were a leader.
Mhm.
What did you do to change? How did you, once you became aware of that, what was the steps that you went through that led you to where you wanted to be later?
Um, how many hours do we have here?
Um, we have about 45 minutes. No.
No,
Um,
I say that facetiously, but I think that for me, I think Ed, can I pause just for a second? I'm going to try
yeah.
to put an umbrella over me just because I'm
Okay.
outside and I
Yeah.
want some shade here. The sun's
Yeah.
shifting.
Sure. Yeah. I can cut this out. Oh,
There, let's see if that works. Sorry about that.
that's okay. So,
My lighting crew, dropping the ball on me here.
it's great. Where are you?
But we live in East Jackson. I'm sitting on our roof deck right now, and that's Snow King Mountain in the back. So
Okay.
yeah.
Great. I thought that.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it's great. It's gorgeous day, and I decided my office is all torn apart. I'm having it redone, so I decided, I'm just going to sit on the deck today.
Well, it's a perfect place to talk. So
Back to your question.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so the for me, it's when I realized that some of my actions and my impact on other people were either not landing um, with the intent that I had, and they were having a negative impact on people, negative impact on um, maybe how they felt about themselves or how they were doing their job. And and it and at that point, I realized that I wasn't really an agent for change. And I wasn't CEO of this company. I was executive chairman. And I wasn't, and the company needed to change. It needed to, and ultimately I felt that it needed a change in leadership, but I was a piece of that. And, and it took that break, that realization, and other people come to me and saying, Shaun, this isn't working. You need to step back. And nobody had ever told me that. Um, and it was, that, realization, awakening, what have you, that where I looked inside and I said, look, I I've been on a path, probably since I was 14 years old, that I've created, but it's a mission and a path that maybe m- m- a lot of other people, had influence. Well, I know for a fact a lot of other people have influenced now that I've unpacked it, and it's not a path that I can continue on. I have to change, and I have to change inside. Um, I have to change, the way I interact with others. I have to change what my intentions are. I have to change a lot of things. And so, I had the luxury of really being able to take a step back for a number of months and really get to know myself better. And I honestly believe that you cannot be a good leader, a good, authentic leader, unless you are willing to really get to know yourself. You have to know yourself. And no mission statement, no written values, no leadership handbook is going to help you unless you know yourself. And so for me, that's the journey. And there is so much wrapped up in that, and this is why it's a very long you could do a whole series of podcasts on this topic. For me, it was a lot about, my narrative, my persona. A lot of it was about managing expectations that other people had of me. Wow, Shaun, you're really smart. You're a great leader. You're financially successful. You've done all these great things. You know all these people, and it's like those were all things that were great, but my core, they weren't really important to me. They weren't really who I was, and I think this happens a lot in our society, where we get on a path that you know it it may be the path that you choose and it may be what you want, but more than likely you're you're forming that narrative based on other people's expectations as much as your own. And so when I realized that was the big switch for me. And really going back, and man, that's hard to do, because this whole narrative starts when you're a male, 13, 14 years old, and it doesn't stop. There is no, the only off ramps that I see are into pretty dark places, and we intentionally avoid those dark places. We don't take those off ramps. We don't look in those dark places. We're on to the next thing. We're putting the next layer on, breaking out the next sword, the next shield, and that's how we're moving forward. And um, so
Shaun,
that's what.
I believe that what you have just described is what a lot of men are experiencing. And it surprises them because they were, in essence, trained not to see these things. Their educational background, their sports background, their family was not to be self-critical, but to be very focused and purposeful. We're gonna keep driving ahead, and all of a sudden we're at a cliff. And so what do we do? Or we're at a cul-de-sac. And what do we do? How do I turn around and come back to some place where I can take another turn and go a different direction? And none of us have been, I know I'm older than you by a few years, but none of that ever came to me, as a child, as a young man, as a career
Mhm.
person. I mean, even to today, I've never had that kind of instruction. I've had to do it myself. But what I see is that when you make that transition, that everything opens up for you, and it's and the and for me it was I was still in Jackson, and this was August of 2019. I had published my first book the previous fall. I had spent 10 months doing book events all over the country. And I woke up in the middle of the night and realized this chapter of my life is over. So what am I going to do? And
Right.
I didn't know what I was going to do. And I didn't know what I was going to do, really know what I was going to do 3, 4, even 5 years later. But now I do. But it took that long to get to that point. And what I'm doing with you is what I'm supposed to be doing. But what I want to celebrate is that this is not a representation of some kind of failure. This is a representation of growth and of health. And I think,
No, absolutely. It really is, and that's a key point, that I think people miss is, people will say, "Holy shit, you went through that collapse. You really screwed up, man. I don't know if I want to be friends with you," kind of thing. It's like, yeah,
oh
you went
yeah,
from being, yeah, and or it's silence. It's worse. People
yeah,
just the
that too.
silence. but then there are people who will come around and say, wow, I've really been thinking about what you're saying and what you're doing, and holy crap, that's amazing. Tell me more.
Yeah.
And, you know, and so that connection, that universal connection that we all have in the universe is something that some people can tap into and some people can recognize, and some people don't. They close it out. And I used to be one of those people. I used to close it out.
Well, if I could give you any advice, hone your story so that you can tell it, so that you feel, so that you can tell it to people who you meet on the airplane or you meet, on the ski lift, or when to have it in a small enough form, short enough form, so when you say it, they say, "Oh, that's really great. That's really cool." That's what I'm finding is that when we have that facility to tell our story, then it opens up things. And I'll give you an example of what I'm seeing. One of the one of the phenomenons that I've identified over the last 20 years is that a lot of people in their 40s are making significant changes in their life. They've been in a career for 20, 25 years. And all of a sudden they said, it's time for me to change. I have to do something different. And I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't want to do what I've been doing, but I got to do something different. And so they leave their business, and they have to begin to figure out how do I change? How do I become something different? And they're not. And in some cases, they're thinking, how do I do this until I retire? But in other cases, they're saying, how can I do this for the rest of my life? And what is that I want to do the rest of my life? Because now I realize this, what I was doing is not what I wanted to do. And,
Hmm.
and so there's this elation that comes with, oh, discovery, I get to start over. And you can be 60, happy birthday, or you can be 73, happy birthday to me next week, or you can be 40, 42. I was 42 when I started my consulting practice. And so I think that these moments of transition are ones to celebrate. And when we celebrate them, other people join us in that, and it gives them permission to change as well. And it's a great thing. And so many people that have been on the podcast have entered into that. And whether you're retiring or you're changing your careers, it doesn't matter. You're going to be doing something with the rest of your life. And the question is, how do you do something that you enjoy, but also it really satisfies you? It makes a difference. And I'm planning to work till I'm 100. I got 27 more years.
Sure, sure.
Yeah,
Yeah,
27
that's
more years.
right.
And I can't, and I'm planning that out. I just want to, I guess what I want to say, Shaun, I celebrate all that you've been through, all that you've accomplished, but also suggest that you're only at the beginning of your life.
Right, right. I agree. I think, and that's the cool part. I love, I'm an adventurer. I love venturing into the unknown, and as long as I feel like I'm prepared and I have the tools to get me to wherever I'm going. I know that there are going to be some, cold nights on hard ground somewhere, by myself. But I also know that there's, around the corner a place to warm up and a place to take comfort. And it's getting from, those points in life, point A to point B, that really, um, that's the fun part of life ultimately, and the fun part of a career and everything else. And I think that I like a lot of the frameworks about well-being and happiness that are out there nowadays. Some, there's too many of them ultimately, but Arthur Brooks has a good one, and that is, really, knowing yourself first is
Yeah.
key. And that's what I was referring to. I got to the point where I was 58 years old, and the only thing I knew about myself is that I would wake up in the morning and I didn't like me. I I did not like me. I went to I'm part of a men's group, which is next to my wife and my immediate family, the most important thing in my life. And we meet every 2 weeks on Zoom. They're from all over the country. And, in one of those groups, the facilitator asked me, and we were doing this one in person at a retreat. And she said, Shaun, what do you like? Name three things that you love about yourself. And I could not name one, not one thing that I
Feel
liked
that.
about
I feel
myself.
that. Yeah, I understand.
And I broke down. Um, and
Yeah.
um, and then the guy next to me, who happens to be one of my best friends, we just went around the room. There were six or eight of us, and he went on. He had no problem. He had like eight things that he loved about himself, which and I love this guy too. I love him like a brother, but and went around the room, and to varying degrees of this, and that at that moment I realized, okay, back to Arthur Brooks thing, until I know myself, I can't love myself. It's just like until you know another human being, you can't love them,
That's right.
right?
That's
I
right.
mean, yeah, and so my lighting is messing. I'm
Yeah,
gonna let it go.
we're going to finish here in a second.
Anyway, so I personally believe that is a step that you can't avoid. You can't shortcut that step. And I truly believe that. And
Yeah.
I think the second thing is really purpose. And what is your purpose? I think that's to some extent, that's a question that is, it I don't know. It's kind of a false premise to some degree, because I think that, why were we born? What will we die for? What is our purpose? And I think that my view on that is your your purpose can be so many things. You know, it could be your family, it could be your own well-being, it could be waking up and feeling great every day. It could be building a great business, leading people. I have a mentor who goes back. 2004 is when I met this guy. He invested in my company. He was on the board of my company for 5 years. He's a titan in industry. You would know his name if I mentioned it. Um, and he's in his 90s now, and he said the other day that his purpose in life was to make money, but he owns it. Oh, great. That's awesome, man. You know what your purpose is. I mean, you're better off than 90% of the people out there. Your purpose is to die a billionaire. And more power to you, brother. That's not my purpose.
Not mine
And
either.
yeah, and I think a lot of other people had me pegged as that being my purpose. And the minute I turned that corner, I said, wait a minute, holy shit, I've been pursuing this purpose that I don't own, that is not congruent with who I am. That was just like such I can't even describe that moment when I had that realization. So, um, and then I think the third thing is helping others, and how we show up for other people and how we help other people. And we've talked about this a lot in the last hour. Is really critical. And just this conversation you and I are having will probably have an impact on somebody when
No
they
doubt.
watch this
There's
podcast.
no doubt about it. No doubt about it.
And so I look at the writing that I'm doing now, and the particularly writing about my experiences since my big break a couple of years ago, and what I've been through, and putting it out there in with honest detail, has already started to help people. I've had people come to me with private messages saying, "Wow, I think I need to rethink how things are going, and this is really helping me do it. And that authenticity and that vulnerability um, has got me thinking, and that's helping others.
I'd love to see what you've written. And
It's on Substack. You can go
okay,
check it out.
I will. Send me what you would like to have in the show notes, kind of bio, profile, whatever you want to put there. How people can reach you, whatever you want, and a picture. And
Okay.
this will come out sometime in the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Okay.
I appreciate your candor and your freedom to speak honestly, um, and uh, and I wish I had spent more time with you while I was in Jackson because
Same, Ed. Same.
like I like the person I'm seeing before me today. So next time I'm out there, I'll come see you, and maybe we'll do an event together.
Yeah, I would love that. We'll go do a Silicon Coular event or something like that. And I think, this topic that you're exploring around leadership, and I've watched a few of your interviews. It doesn't end. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, go back to the Egyptians, right? They had, they were studying leadership and understanding organizational behavior and everything else. It doesn't end. It keeps going, and it's a great well of learning.
Yeah, I've been thinking about, is there a point when I run out of steam with the Eddie Network podcast, and or do I keep going and celebrate the next big milestone? This week is the 350th episode. That's the milestone.
That's
But
what you said. That's great. Congratulations.
and the next one will be 500, which will be sometime at the end of next year. But then the next will be 1,000. But 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 what I see is that this is an opportunity for people to say things that a lot of people who don't know them get to say. And most of these people that I have on here, and they're not celebrities. They're not people that everybody knows. They're just common people who are doing hard work and good work, and they're trying to do the best for their family, best for their communities, and they're learning things and they're writing things. And these are the people who will inhabit the communities and the businesses of the future. And I'm, it gives me a lot of hope. I didn't have a lot of hope 5, 6 years ago, but I do now because of the people that
Good.
I've met here. So, and I include you in that. So
Well,
thank
thank you.
you.
Thank All right, Ed. Well, let's stay in touch, and I'll shoot you some information on me. I'm not exact. I haven't been asked that question since I've started down a new path, so I've got to figure out how I want to represent that. But I'm not gonna. I'm just gonna do it from the
There,
heart.
there are no expectations, no expectations. So
All
thank
right,
you,
man.
Sean, and
Thank you.
thank you all for watching. And I look forward to seeing you next time here on the Eddie Network podcast. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
See you later.